Good afternoon, respected speaker, honorable VC sir, and all faculty members. It's a glorious moment to extend my warm wishes on behalf of UM Jaipur ACM Student Chapter. I want to convey my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Rahul Johari sir to accepting my invitation and presenting the webinar on blockchain algorithm on secure transaction. Before starting the event, I would like to talk something about speaker, Dr. Rahul Johari. He is working as an assistant professor at University School of Information and Communication Technology, Guru Gobind Singh, Indraprastha. He is the head and founder of Swinger. It is also known as Security and Wireless IoT Networking Group of Engineering and Research. He was chosen for Albert Nelson Marxius Achievement Award for the year 2018 and 19 for professional excellence in the field of computer science. 83 Scopus, 5 international patents. He has indexed publication, 20 book chapters, and over 100 publications in leading IEEE. So now I would like to invite our Honorable VC Sir of University of Engineering Management Jaipur, Professor Dr. Biswajoy Chatterjee, to give us an introduction about our ACM chapter. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Shomodeep, and thank you, Dr. Rahul Johari, sir, for agreeing to be a part of this webinar today. We are all, as I was telling you already, sir, that blockchain is something which is going to change our lives, as we all know, like the internet did. We have been talking about this for a while now. Now it is time to implement everything in blockchain, and as it is said, if it is not in blockchain, it is not accepted. So it's time to implement that. So the talk is especially interesting because here Dr. Rahul Johari sir has said that he is going to show some simulation of blockchain, and in fact he is going to show how the credit card details and these things can be secured using the blockchain. So that is the most interesting part of the talk, and that differentiates from other general talks on blockchain. So thank you, sir, for doing that. And about ACM, as Shomodeep has requested me to tell a little bit about ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery, ACM. It is the world's largest scientific and educational society through different local chapters, amongst which our UM Jaipur ACM Students chapter also stands strong. ACM delivers resources that advance computing as a science and a profession. ACM provides the computing field's premier digital library and serves its members and the computing profession with leading-edge publications, conferences, and career resources. ACM brings together computing educators, researchers, and professionals to inspire dialogue, share resources, and address the field's challenges. As the world's largest computing society, ACM strengthens the profession's collective voice through strong leadership, promotion of the highest standards, and recognition of technical excellence. ACM supports the professional growth of its members by providing opportunities for lifelong learning, career development, and professional networking. UM Jaipur ACM Student Chapter was founded in the year 2014, and from then onwards, the students all are giving their best to perform the duties of an ideal student chapter. I would like to take this opportunity to extend a very warm welcome to our honorable guest, Dr. Rahul Johari. Sir, this is a speech, this is a text which is there in ACM, and we talk about it, but I must say that ACM is definitely the most prominent student chapters played in many universities, including UM Jaipur, and I'm thankful to the students for connecting with speakers of your caliber, and we are all enriched from wonderful lectures from your side. I should say it's all over to you, sir. You may kindly take on from here. We are all eagerly waiting.
Okay, thank you for your words. Yes, sir, you can start. Thank you for your words, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, all the faculty members. Good evening, all the dear students. Thank you, Biswajoy Chatterjee, sir. Thank you, Mrinal Kanti, sir, and for inviting me for the ACM talk. And Soumyadeep has been too good. The way he has interacted with me for the last almost 15-20 days has been too good. God bless you, Soumyadeep. Your efforts will definitely help you to go good in your career, in your professional life. You will definitely rise a lot, because we are also always looking out for such students who can actually excel in their professional careers. So God bless you for that, and thank you for having me. I hope I will be able to convey good knowledge about the blockchain technology among all the students, and maybe some of the faculty members who might have joined the talk. My basic objective of my talk will be to ignite the spirit of security among the student community, because blockchain stands for security, and that is what the algorithm says. It's a blockchain algorithm for secure transactions. So security is one of those areas which has got promising future in the next 10 years. So when we talk about the technologies which have got a very bright scope in the next 8 to 10 years, we have got cloud computing, we have got IoT, we have got the blockchain technology. And blockchain technology is definitely the part of the security. So security, yeah, it's a very promising career. It's an evergreen career. It will never get obsolete. It will never get outdated. So if you are looking for a career that can give you at least a 10-year security, then definitely security is one of them. And we should have a good knowledge of cryptography and the hashing techniques to understand about the betterment of the blockchain technology. So let's get started and discuss about it. Now there is a very beautiful quote which I found on the web, which I want every one of you to quietly read it for just a few seconds before we discuss it. So what it says actually, this art of the war teaches us to rely not on the likelihood of enemies not coming, but on our own readiness to receive him, not on the chance of his not attacking, but rather on the fact that we have made our position inaccessible. The point, no, this quote is not mine. It is by the art of war writer by the name Sun Tzu. Now, what he's trying to make a point, and a very valid point, in fact, that maybe in the entire lifetime of any software or in a company, we may not get attacked by hackers or by the crackers or by the hacktivists or by the script kiddies. But then that does not mean we should not adopt security measures. We should always be in a proactive approach. Proactive means you're always ready to fight the attackers, the hackers, because you are in touch with technologies, you know what are the drawbacks of technology. So accordingly, you can plan your strategy to make sure that your data of the organization remains secure. It doesn't get hacked by the hackers. So it's always a game of proactive versus reactive approach. Reactive is something where we say that once your data get hacked by the hackers, they have stolen it, then only you start taking precautionary measures. Then only you can start taking remedial measures. But it's always better to go for proactive approach, meaning thereby that you always develop such a strong fundamentals in the organizations that your data never get leaked out. No theft of the data takes place. And that is what the objective of security is. Always develop good algorithms, good techniques to make sure that the data remains fundamentally secure. For example, we can take the example of university. The data of the student is very, very valuable. We cannot ensure, we cannot take any chances that the data of the student should get leaked out, because we have got examination results are there, his entire enrollment number, the course in which he's studying, all the data related to student is very, very crucial. It should not get leaked out, because it may happen that the examination result is not, examination division is not taking proactive measure, and chances are that the data might get stolen out or maybe hacked by the hackers. So this should not happen. Same with banks. Banks are dealing with the accounts of hundreds and hundreds of customers, hundreds and thousands of customers. So they cannot get complacent in their approach. They should always take a strong proactive measures to make sure that our account numbers, our passwords, when we do RTGS and NEFT, real-time gross settlement, and the National Electronic Fund Transfer, our net banking accounts should be very, very secure. It should not get hacked by the hackers. So the point is, we should always go for proactive approach rather than reactive approach. Now, what kind of data should we secure? That's a very important part. So we say the biometric ID of the individual, like my thumb impression, my fingerprints, my iris, the foreheads, overall body posture. So these are all my biometric identities, and that is something very close to me, very personal to me. So it should not get leaked out. Nobody should be able to access it. Plus my bank account details, my digital wallet details, like my Paytm details, my PhonePe details, they are always financial transactions. Now this is very information, very close, very personal to me. So nobody should get access to it. For example, in the biometric ID, when we got our Aadhaar card made, we gave government all our biometric identifications. Now, if we trust the government that they will keep all our Aadhaar database in a very secure and strong, they will adopt very secure and strong techniques to make sure that our biometric details don't get leaked out. Otherwise, it will play havoc. So we are looking for the biometric details. They should be very secure. And the other important thing related to data security is data security and privacy. So biometric details is very personal to me. So my privacy should not get violated by a government or by the private companies. For example, when we got Geo SIMs, we have all given our biometric details to the Reliance. Now we expect from the Reliance that our biometric identities should not be leaked out from their database. Otherwise, it will be a great problem for all of us, because we have trusted these companies. We expect these companies to play very secure way. So what could be the probable solution to these kind of anomalies or these kind of problems? There are many. Blockchain technology is one of them. So we say adoption of blockchain technology will help you to secure your vulnerable data. Means the data which you think is very, very important to me, and I want to secure it forever. So there are many, many ways. Blockchain is one of them. I don't say it's only technology that provides security. It is one of the many technologies that provide the security of the data. Now, what we are looking for in the next 10 years, where the information security world is going to be, because blockchain technology is a part of the information security domain. So these are some of the prerequisites which we want from the student community who would like to excel in the field of the blockchain technology is a good and a working knowledge of cryptographic techniques. Those of you who are studying in your BTech program or the MTech program or in the MCA, we have got large number of cryptographic techniques. There is a subject called network security or the information security for that matter. Now this subject teaches various cryptographic techniques like Caesar cipher exists, Veneer cipher, rail fence cipher, affine cipher, hill climbing cipher. So multiple number of the cipher techniques exist, which can be, and a good knowledge of them will be helpful for the blockchain part. Then a good working knowledge of cryptographic algorithms. Now primarily we divide the cryptography into two broad categories. One is a symmetric cryptography and the other is a asymmetric cryptography. Symmetric cryptography says we can use the same key both for carrying out encryption and decryption. Asymmetric cryptography says we can use a pair of keys for carrying out encryption and decryption. Now, what could be the probable example for symmetric cryptography? For example, DES algorithm, data encryption standard algorithm. We have got AES algorithm, advanced encryption standard algorithms. So these are the example of symmetric cryptographic algorithms. Then we have got asymmetric cryptographic algorithms. What could be the probable example for it? For example, RSA, Rivest, Shamir, and the Edelman algorithm, very popular algorithm in the world of cryptography, which uses a pair of keys, one public and one private key for carrying out encryption and decryption. Now here we have got, when we talk of the keys and the algorithm, because I'm using the word symmetric and the asymmetric cryptographic algorithms, and we are also talking of key, like symmetric cryptography uses the same key for encryption and decryption. Now, how do I share this key between source and destination? That's another important challenge for me. So there was a guy called Diffie-Hellman you might have heard it, their name, Diffie-Hellman key exchange algorithm. That's a very popular algorithm developed by the Diffie and Hellman, how to share a key on the web only, on electronically, between the source and the destination. Very popular algorithm. And they also got the award called the Turing Award in 2015. So when we talk of algorithm and the key, primarily what we are saying is something like when you go to your bed in the night, you lock your outside door, right? So you got a lock and you got a key. एक ताला है और एक चाबी है. Now the tala is same as the algorithm. The lock is same as the algorithm. And the chabi is same as the key. Now how secure my algorithm is, yeah, how secure my lock is, depends upon the complexity, right? So that is why we would have heard the name ki there are 5 lever lock. Link ke tale aate hain. 5 lever lock ke, 7 lever lock, 9 lever lock. Now what does that mean? It's a complexity. How many number of permutation and combinations they are doing within the algorithm. So more you do, more secure the algorithm becomes. The less complexities can easily be hacked by the hackers. Means the thief can come in the night and he can break my lock. So key is used for locking and unlocking the algorithm. That's why most of the algorithm works on 64-bit or 128-bit or 256 bits. That means a predefined key length is there. Now, if you've got a lock and a key, एक ताला है और एक चाबी है, और अगर आपसे चाबी खो जाए, suppose you lost the key, what you will do? Go to the locksmith and ask him कि ये मेरा ताला है और मुझसे चाबी खो गई है. I want a duplicate key. Now, what will the locksmith do? He is more like a crypt analyst. He will try to apply his experience. Now, he is not an engineer. He has not done electronics or communication engineering or computer science engineering. Neither he has studied the book of Corman for design and analysis of algorithm. He does not know. He does not know time complexity. He's not aware of space complexity. Nothing. But he has it on the job training. He has seen many locks. He applies his logic. He applies experience, and he will try to produce a duplicate key for the same lock. तो दैट मीन्स कि एक एल्गोरिथम की एक चाबी भी हो सकती है, एक से अधिक चाबी भी हो सकती है, और डुप्लीकेट चाबी भी बना सकते हैं. पर क्या कभी ऐसा पॉसिबल है कि व्हेन यू अप्रोच द एल्गोरिथम लॉकस्मिथ एंड यू से दिस इज अ की, नाउ यू बिल्ड अ लॉक फॉर मी, कैन ही डू दैट? द आंसर इज नो. इफ ही हैज अ लॉक, he will produce a key, but using key he cannot build a lock, he cannot build an algorithm. So it's always security is something which is very evergreen field. That's why we say it. You keep on developing the algorithms, next generation of algorithms, more the hackers will break it, and then again you develop a next generation of algorithms. So in academia, when this subject is taught, algorithm analysis and design and the network security cryptographic algorithms, the point we are trying to make as academician and researcher is not you to learn these algorithms, but what you need to learn is the art of algorithm designing, art of coding. We don't want you to learn or ratify these algorithms. No, they have already been made. They're already available in the open source in academia. But yes, what we expect from the next generation, that they should see how the current classical traditional algorithms are, and then they apply their IQ and logic and think about how to improvise the algorithm. Maybe let's say DES has 7 rounds or 8 rounds. For example, DES algorithm has 8 substitution boxes. Now, let's say if I am a student, I say what DES algorithm is doing with 8 substitution boxes, I will do in 4 substitution boxes. That's my contribution. So what we expect from the next generation is not to learn these algorithms. They won't make any sense. They've already been designed, developed, and deployed. What we want is that think your own ways, come up with the bright ideas, because nowadays idea is very worthful quantity. People go for ideas. Many of the venture capitalists who put up the money in the startup companies are looking for your ideas. What you knew you can do to society. What can be a noble contribution? So think over it and should go outright for it. Don't go for traditional things which are already been in place, which has already been exploited by so many number of people. Think new. We have got something called NIC, novelty, innovation, and creativity. And more younger you are, the fire in the belly for the NIC is that high. Moment you become old, the NIC is very difficult to achieve, very difficult to get new ideas, because you become a part of the system and you become routine and mundane. For example, if there is a 3-year-old kid, he might have 400 questions per day to ask. When the same kid turns 6 years, the number of questions decreases to 200. When the same kid becomes 10-year-old child, number of questions decreases down to 100. When the same kid goes 12 years of age, his number of questions per day which he want to ask for his parents and teachers decreases also 50. And when he's almost 14 years of age, he hardly asks anything, because what we have done to him is we have made him as a part of our system. What our system says? Don't ask, don't query, just do what we are saying. And somewhere we are killing his art of novelty, innovation, and creativity. Now that student should be given a free. That's what I think. If I really want to extract best out of the student, and the student should also bear that responsibility. That freedom brings responsibility. Freedom should not be taken for granted. When we give you a freedom and liberty to think new, then think new. Don't think destructive things. We don't want those people in our society. We want a people with a passion about technologies, who can work for hours and hours, and who also have a very deadly combination of math skills. What is math? I hope many of you have already heard the name. Mathematics, algorithm, and programming. And let me tell you, it's a deadly combination. In my so long career of almost 15 years in teaching, I have hardly found very few students who are good or skilled in these 3 areas: mathematics, algorithm, and programming. But the person who is good in mathematics is bound to be good in algorithms also. That is by and large, we make an assumption. For example, if you are good in maths, you are bound to be good in physics, because you cannot be good in physics if you're not good in maths. Same way, if you're good in maths, and maths is something like an evergreen. So enjoy the maths. Don't learn maths. You might be in your different years of BTech, and sometimes you might be thinking that I'm doing computer science and engineering. What maths has to do with it? But computer science cannot exist without a maths. If you go to the deep down of any of the subject of computer science, you will only find maths and nothing else. That's why in India and everywhere in the world, when the computer science came for the very first time, almost all mathematicians were handling computer science only. We did not have the core people from computer science. The people who were teaching the maths, they started teaching computer science. Later on, gradually from the IITs, then the triple IITs, and then the central government universities and the state government university started have the computer science department. But I did my PhD from Delhi University, and here also in Delhi University, mathematics computer science department is under the subdomain of mathematics department. So we can't have a computer science without a knowledge of maths. So enjoy the maths if you really want to excel in security as well as in data sciences. Mathematical knowledge, statistical knowledge is very, very handy. Plus the art of understanding the algorithms, finding out the complexity in the algorithm, both time and the space complexity, and improving it further. That is another skill which you should try to work upon. That's become very handy when you go into the industry. And the programming. So these three are the very deadly combination when we are looking for a very skillful or full stack developer or a full stack engineer. Now, because we are having this as an ACM event, we should, when we talk of security, There are three people we always admire. I've already taken their names, and all of you would also studied about their algorithms. They are Rivest, Shamir, and the Edelman. Ronald Rivest, Adi Shamir, and the Leonard Edelman. Now, the entire branch of information security, together with the hashing and the blockchain technology, stands on the shoulder of these three persons. They have done a lot in this branch, and they were also awarded the Turing Award in way back in 2002. Now, what is the Turing Award? In computer science, we do not have a Nobel Prize. So, what we equivalent award we have got? We have got Turing Award in the honor of Alan Turing, who has done a lot in the area of the computer science, and ACM, whose event we are part of right now. They started this award way back in the 1965. So right now it's 2021. So more than 55 years have almost gone by. Now, considering the population we have got and the number of engineers who pass out from the various engineering college per year, we should have got at least 20 awards, maybe more than that. But so unfortunate to say that as a country, we have been able to get only one award. And that too in the 1994, it was awarded to Professor Raj Reddy in the field of artificial intelligence. And this award is given every year to a person or a group of persons who have done outstanding research, breakthrough research in the area of the computer science. So as a India, as a country, we have been able to get only one award, that too quite a long time back, before 2000. So after that, 20 years have passed by, but that we have not. And that is what we say, expect from the younger generation, that you can get this award only when you have got an NIC embedded in it, novelty, innovation, and creativity. Something new. Keep on thinking that. Keep on innovating. Don't get stale. Don't get obsolete. Maybe so as a society, we may not throw you many challenges, but that does not mean you don't become self-motivated. Keep that fire in your belly. Keep on thinking new. Whenever we as a teacher teach you, always have why it is like that, how can I improve it further. Throw that question as challenge to you, so that you keep on growing, you keep on thinking new. Don't become stale, don't become obsolete. So system will degrade you, no doubt about that, but it's for you to decide that I should not become a part of the routine, stale, mundane system. I should expand my horizons, learn about technologies, grow with the technologies, keep on thinking some new ideas which I can imbibe in myself. Then the other very important people who have got Turing Award in the area of security is in 2015, they are Diffie and the Hellman. Because before that, it was very difficult to how to share the key between the source and destination when we carry out encryption and decryption. So Diffie and Hellman proposed the algorithm, Diffie-Hellman key exchange algorithm, which is an asymmetric cryptographic algorithm. And for their novel contribution, they were awarded Turing Award in the 2015. Now, these are the other two people who I admire the most. No, they're nothing to do with the blockchain technology, but I thought I should share with the younger generation that we Indians are also not that bad. Now, the person on the left-hand side, he is Professor Anil Jain. He is the world's #1 researcher in the area of computer science. Today, when the talk is over, you just Google his profile. Even right now, you can Google his profile. The number of publications he has got and the number of citations per publication he has got is amazing. Means the kind of work he has done in his lifetime, it's mind-boggling. And on the person on the right-hand side is Professor CNR Rao. He is nothing to do with computer science, but then he is India's #1. His Scopus H index is also very high, and in 2014 he was awarded India's highest civilian award called Bharat Ratna, because he was the first Indian-born scientist who, based in India, was able to reach a magical figure of H index. H index is a Herschel's index. By crossing it, making it a century. He was the first Indian-born scientist based in India who's crossed the H index of 100. H index indicates the ranking of the researcher, ranking of the academician. So it's very difficult to increase the ranking. It takes time, it takes
There seems to be some problem.
And very few people are able to cross that century of 100. Hardly 1% of the entire group of people working in that particular domain. So I really admire these people. Current constitution. When we talk, it goes to Satoshi. He was the first person who came up. He was the first person who came with the concept of inventing the cryptocurrencies. So they is known for inventing Bitcoin. He also implemented the world's first blockchain, and he also deployed the world's first decentralized digital currency. So initially, it was always thought of that blockchain technology will be used only for cryptocurrencies, for carrying out financial transactions on the web. True, it is true. But then today, in 2021, there are so many applications of blockchain technology. Blockchain technology is no longer confined to only the concept of the digital currency. But then big question mark comes in, who is real Satoshi Nakamoto? So information security world is confused because we really do not know who is Satoshi Nakamoto, because he has never come to the limelight and staked a claim that this is me. He has always ridden behind the curtains. He has always stand behind the curtains. But the closest person who was matched is Dorian Nakamoto. His profile is there on the web, and he was also Japanese and very active during the same time period when Satoshi Nakamoto was. So it is also believed that Dorian Nakamoto worked by the name Dorian, but actually he was Satoshi Nakamoto. And he is the person to whom we can give the credit for coming up with the concept of the blockchain technology. So there are many theories on the web, but there is no precise answer that who the real Satoshi Nakamoto is. So he's the person who has been given a credit for coming up with the concept of digital transactions on the web with the help of Bitcoin, which is one of the world's most popular cryptocurrency. Now, when we talk of currency, we know we are talking of rupees in India, INR. But when you do the electronic transactions, we call it cryptocurrency. Crypto means you're taking the help of cryptographic techniques, cryptographic algorithms for carrying out the security of the money, of the financial transaction on the internet world. And we know internet world is very highly insecure. There are many brilliant professional hackers who are available on the web, and they can be a big threat to the financial transactions, the credit card payment, the debit card payments. It's a big challenge for the security experts to provide a security to these digital transactions. So it's a decentralized digital currency without a central bank. Now, in the traditional banking system, if you see, in India, we've got Reserve Bank of India. Almost every country have got their centralized banks, which introduce the rules, regulations, and policies that how the other bank should operate. How should the profit and loss account be maintained? What should be the balance sheet? So they laid down the guidelines, and every bank has to follow it. So it's all the centralized banking system. But in the case of the cryptocurrencies and the blockchain technology, we work on the decentralized manner, because we want to give the power to every node who is participating in a network, and all the information is recorded into a public distributed ledger called as a blockchain. Now, how can I look what Satoshi Nakamoto has done? So let me take you a first block of the transaction. Is the website visible, blockchain.com? Anyone can say quick yes or no?
It is visible, sir.
Visible. Okay, fine. So I can see here it's blockchain.com BTC/block/1. Now this is a block 1, and it was created, or it was mined. Mined is same as created on when? January 9, 2009 at 8:24 AM GMT by unknown. So this was the world's first block which was created by Satoshi Nakamoto. When? In 2009, roughly 12 years back. So that was the first block he created. But it is claimed as unknown because we are not sure that who the real guy is, because he has never staked claim to his work as such. And we can come to know about the hash value. I will also show a simulation how to generate the hash values. Then confirmation timestamp, we can look at 8:24 AM in the morning, 9th January 2009. Height is the number of block in a blockchain. So initially it was first block in a blockchain. So height is 1. And the miner, the creator, the inventor is all unknown. So that was around 12 years back. Now, what is the current status? That is, if I am very interested and I would like to know, okay, what is the current status? So let me go to the latest block of the transaction in a block in a chain. Now it is roughly around 6,90,825. Means that many number of blocks have been added in a public distributed ledger called as blockchain since 2009. And where I can see it in a blockchain.com. So if you're interested, you can open the same website on your systems also and have a look. So it's called blockchain.com/BTC/blocks. And this is a hash value, and where it was created 9 minutes back. So quite a latest one. Miner is unknown. He has not disclosed his name. Size is available in terms of bytes. That what is the size of the blockchain? Other miners are known. They have come with their alias name like YBTC, Ent, Pool, Poolin. So you can take any name. You can remain in the hiding, and you can become a part of the global blockchain network. So these are number of blocks available here. Some were mined 1 hour back, some were mined 2 hours back, 3 hours back, and so on and so forth. So all the blocks which are a part of the global blockchain world are available on this portal called blockchain.com. A very useful one. And it has been archiving every financial transactions which are being happening in a blockchain world. Now, what are the fundamental principles of the blockchain? Just like every technology has few standing pillars, here also we got DIT, means distribution, immutability, and transparency. Decentralization, which will include distribution, immutability, and transparency. So when we talk of decentralization, the true meaning of decentralization is not having a single centralized unit. And blockchain, by their design, are autonomous in nature and does not have a single central governing unit. So they don't follow any like traditional banking system rules. Their rules are very flexible, and we don't have a single centralized body which is controlling the working of the blockchain. They follow a principle of transparency. That means something which has got almost zero opacity. And blockchain follow zero privacy policy. Means all the transactions are public in nature and they can be viewed by anyone on the network. So they don't work behind the scene. Almost all the transactions are happening in the public distributed ledger. It's open to all. They can see it, they can interact it, they can even add the block in a blockchain. So it's very flexible, very transparent in that sense. Also, we follow principle of immutability. For example, those of you who are good in Java or you are learning Java programming language, Java provides strings as immutable in nature. Immutability means something that cannot be altered, something that cannot be modified. It means that once a transaction has been pushed into a blockchain, it cannot be altered, it cannot be modified at all. It will be freezed. No one can change the contents of the already existing block in a blockchain. So underlying principle is don't give all the control to one entity bank, but trust many entities, many stakeholders. Because in traditional banking system, we trust the bank. And we have seen in the recent past, in the last 4 to 5 years, many banks have gone bankrupt. And because of their policies, some of them have been they have even defaulted. Many people have been fraudsters and they have frauded with these banks. So we can't trust a single entity. We have to take into account many stakeholders. Now let's look at what are the internal component of a blockchain. What is blockchain actually made up of? When we use the word blockchain, that means it is a chain of blocks, right? But what does the block comprises of? What are the contents of the block? So we say, let's start creating one of the blockchain for us. So for that everyone can understand it very clearly. Let me create first block in a blockchain, and I call it as a genesis block. So the first block in a blockchain is always the genesis block. And to that, we'll add more block. So I create a block called B1, right? Now I pass certain information. from one block to another block. What does this information contain? So what are the contents? It contains the hash value of the previous block. So hash of the B naught. Then I use the MD5 algorithms because I need to generate the hash values. What do? I write my own hashing technique, or I use certain predefined algorithms like MD1, MD2, MD3, MD4, MD5 algorithm, or I can use SHA series of algorithms, secure hash algorithm, SHA. So I can have the SHA 64-bit, SHA 128-bit, SHA 256-bit, SHA 512-bit. So I need to either write my own hashing technique, or I can use these predefined hashing based algorithms, and I can use them as a part of my blockchain. So first thing it will contain is the hash of the previous block. Second thing it will contain what is the data you want to secure in your blockchain. So we say fiber data. That means financial data, insurance data, like I can have my insurance policy number, the premium amount by insurance companies, my banking data, my digital wallet data, my bank account number, the saving bank account number, credit card number, the debit card numbers. So much amount of banking data is available. Then in the fiber stand for educational record of the students in colleges and university. They are of very immense importance, because a student, let's say he passed on 2015 and he does not come for 6 years. So for 6 years the university has to preserve his record, his mark sheets, his degree. Or if we take the example of the traditional university like the AMU, the BHU, Agra University, Bareilly University, Kanpur University, they're almost 100 years old. So they have to keep a record of every student who have passed out from any of their course in the university. So data has to be preserved, and more importantly, it has to be preserved in a secure manner so that nobody hacks the data, nobody changes the content or modifies the value of the records, the value of the marks scored by the student. Then EMR is for the electronic medical records, because nowadays we have seen in the hospitals, especially in the time of COVID, so many people have got hospitalized. So their data is with the bank, or with the bank as well as with the hospitals. So hospitals need to keep all the patient ID, patient name, his email address, his phone number, his if he is having a medical insurance, from which company he is having a medical insurance, what are the disease he is suffering from, so that next time if the patient visits the same hospital, then the hospital comes to know, okay, this is a patient which has come, let's say 6 months back also, he was suffering from this disease. So accordingly, his treatment can be guided in a better way. So there are, blockchain can be used for a variety of applications. Wherever we talk of security, blockchain is one of the hottest area where I can use the blockchain for security of the data. Then I've got timestamp, the date and the time, what we call nonce, NONCE, when the block was created, and then the hash value of the current block. So point is, every block contains 2 hash values. One is a hash value of the predecessor block, and one is a hash value of the current block. So when we talk of block in a blockchain, this is it. That this is what the contents of the block in a blockchain are. Then I can add more block in a blockchain, right? So B1, B2, and B2, then we can add B3, add another block, and every block pass on the same information. But if you look at the very first block, the Genesis block, it is not having hash of any predecessor block. So we say hash value of the predecessor block for the Genesis is always 0, null, because it's the first block. Then we have got block B4, then we have got block B5, and these are the chain of blocks which will keep on adding into a blockchain network. And theoretically speaking, there is no upper limit on the number of blocks in a blockchain. Your blockchain can go on and on and on in size. We have seen the blockchain.com 6,90,000 blocks have been added into the global blockchain network. So that theoretically there is no upper limit on the number of blocks I can add to a blockchain. So this is how the typical blockchain look like. We'll have the block 0. It's a Genesis block. It is not containing hash to a predecessor block, so it's empty. Then the data, the fiber data, then the timestamp, and then the hash of the current block, that is the hash of the block 0. Then we've got block 1. then it is having hash of the block B0, then the data, then the timestamp, and then the hash of the block 1, then the block 2, then the hash of the block 1, data, timestamp, hash of the block 2, then the block n, it is having a hash of the block n minus 1, data, timestamp, and then the hash of the block n. So that's how we keep on creating multiple blocks. We keep on adding them into the global blockchain network. So now let's look for the algorithm, the BLAST algorithm. This is a very popular algorithm for creation, for security of the data using a blockchain. So it's a flowchart of the same thing. I think it should be understandable by everyone. We start. Initially, we input the information of the credit card from the user. We ask him to enter the credit card information. Then there's a very popular algorithm called Luhns-Morton algorithm, which is used to check the validity of the credit card, whether the credit card is fraud, pirated, or authentic. So it's a very popular algorithm, Luhns-Morton algorithm, which is used for the verification of it. Then we check, is the credit card detail valid or not? If it is, we move forward, else we go back to the start. And then what do? That we use a hashing algorithm like SHA or the MD5. Both of them are very popular algorithm. We can use them. And data encryption is done using the SHA-256 algorithm or even SHA-128 algorithm. Then we go for symmetric division of ciphertext into a data chunks. Then we position these chunks into data blocks. I will show you programmatically how did we do it. Then we generated the hash using SHA algorithm. Then once the blockchain was ready, it was pushed into the global blockchain network. And we can see the output of our blockchain getting generated. So let me come to the simulation part for this algorithm. Are we able to see the IDE Eclipse environment? Are we able to see the code?
Yes, sir, we are able to see.
Great. So those of you might be new or not familiar with the Java concept as such. It depends on your comfortability zone. Now this is the IDE Eclipse. It's a free of cost, open source. You don't have to pay anything to anybody. You can download the Eclipse IDE, Integrated Development Environment tool on your system. Now within that, what do? We go to the file, new, and I create a project called Java project because I'm showing a simulation in the Java programming language on the Eclipse IDE. So we create a project, Java project. This is something what I've done here by the name BLAST. I created a project. Then something like this new, let's say Java project, and I give the name, let's say India, right? And I click on the finish. I say don't create, and I can see here a new project by the India has got been made. This is the same thing how you need to go for BLAST algorithm. Now in the source you need to get a package. So Java provides me a package. I created a package called block C, right? Now within the package, how do I create a package? I click on source, I go to the new, and I go and create the package. Let us say I created a package by the name of the UEM, your university name. Preferably they should start with a lower name. So I go with a lower name, right? So I got a package by the name UEM. Now I can add classes to it. Same thing what I have done here. I created a folder by the name BLAST. I created a package by the name blockc, and there are two files, two .java files in it. One is a block.java, one is a number of blockchain.java. So I go to the number of blockchain.java, and this is a program for the same. You can try to font size. This is one of the problems. So what I can do here is I can copy the code and go to my notepad application so that you can see the in a much more larger view. Otherwise IDE does not allow me to do that. Go to the file, and I paste the code, right? And I save it the number of blockchain.java. That is what Java says. You should always save the name. Okay, let me save it with the extension Java. Number of blockchain1.java. The class name and the file name should be saved in Java programming language. So I make it one here also, so that it's consistent. Now I can see it that package name is blockc. Then there are two classes of the Java.util package I have imported. One is including all the classes and interfaces, and one is an array list explicit. Now what do I do here? I start with the class definition, the public class number of blockchain.1 Java, then public setting array list. So I create an array list, and what do I name? I give the name to the array list as blockchain, right? So array list blockchain is equal to new array list, and what are the contents going to be? It is going to be the block type, right? So I instantiate the array list class to create a blockchain. And then in the line number 10, I create few string class variable like str1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. Then I declare a static variable called num1, which I'm going to use in my program. Now we come to the Java code, right? So it's a public. Now public is a access specifier. Now in Java, the main function is encapsulated within the class. So I have to declare it as a public in nature. Otherwise, Java virtual machine will not be able to access the main function during runtime. So I have to declare it. It's a compulsory. I cannot declare it as private or protected. Now, one of the problems with the Java is that the main function is encapsulated within the class. If you compare to the C++, in C++ main function was outside the class, but in Java main function is within the class. And I have not instantiated the class at this point of time. Now, how will the JVM make a call to the main function if no reference or no instance of the class is available? So what do we do? What Java has proposed a solution, that James Gosling, the creator of Java, is why don't we make a main function as static in nature? That means you make a function independent of the object of a class. Now JVM can directly make a call to the main function without the help of an object of a class. So that is the reason why we use a keyword as static in the declaration of the main function. Then void is a return type. We all know that main is the name of the function. Then in Java, we receive everything as a string type. So we declare a string array. The name is args, ARGS, right? Then we start with the nano time. We want to calculate how much time it is taking to create a blockchain. So we make a call to nano time function. Now again in Java, we know if the function name contains 2 words, then the first alphabet of the first word goes in the lowercase. That is why n is in the lowercase. And the first alphabet of the next word goes in the uppercase. Now that is the Java coding conventions. That's how it has been designed, and very case sensitive. So you have to follow the small nuances of the Java programming language. And we store the variable into a start type. So we're starting over the program. Now we'll receive the credit card number as an input from the user. Now user can play fraud and make our code fall flat or break in the runtime. So what do we do? It's always better to write a vulnerable code within the try catch. That is, we are going for exception handling. What does exception handling tells us? That the code which is going to access the database, the code which is going for file handling, the code which is going to be network based, such a kind of the vulnerable code should be written within the try, and we should have a matching catch block to handle that appropriate exception. So we receive 3 runtime arguments from the user, 0, 1, and 2. Args is the name of a string array, which you can see in the main definition function. And what does the first do? It receives a 16-digit credit card number as an input from the user. Then 3 digits credit card verification value, CVV number. Then 6 digits for the year, 2 digits for the month, and 4 digits for the year. So overall, we receive 16 plus 3, 19, and 19 plus 6, 25 digits from the end user. And he would like to secure this 25 digits of data using a blockchain. So we tell to the user that what kind of information is provided to us. So we use the SOP statement, system.out.println. That's the way how we print the statement in Java. It's something like a printf or cout, what we use in C and C++. So with system.out.println card number is, and we display the value of str1 variable. Then the CVV number is str2, we have stored them into str2, and the expiry date of the card we have stored into str3 variable. So we display all this information back to the user that we have received these three information from you. Now what do? We concatenate all this. So str1, str2 and str3, and we store the result into a str4 variable. Then we compute what is the length of the str4 variable, right? And we make a call to length function over the string and store variable value into a num1 variable, and we display same thing back to the user. System.out.print in the total concatenated card length is and the number. So what should be the length? 16 plus 3 19, 19 plus 6 25. So we should get the value of num1 as 25 if the user has entered all the credit card number correctly. Thereafter, what we do, we make a call to the Luntz Mod10 algorithm and pass our str4 string as a parameter to it, because we want to check whether credit card number is correct or not. Now it will return us a true or false value. So is credit card valid? That's a Boolean variable we have got. So if it is false, then that means somewhere the credit card number has flaw. Some user has missed out certain digit, or user has wrongly entered the credit card number. So if the credit card valid is equal to false, we display the SOP statement to the user, system.out.println receive card number is invalid. And then we throw the arithmetic exception, because Java provides 5 ways how to handle exception: try, catch, throw, throws, and finally. So when we use a throw keyword, we can manually throw an exception. So I'm throwing exception of the which class? Arithmetic exception. Because why I'm throwing exception? Because the user has entered the wrong credit card number. And how did I check it? Using a Luntz Mod10 algorithm. So let me show that algorithm so that you can see that. So you can also Google on your system and just write Luntz Mod10 algorithm, that you can come to know. Yeah, you can go to Wikipedia or any other site and you can just see what it says. The Luntz algorithm or Luntz formula, also known as modular algorithm, named after its creator, IBM scientist, hence Peter Lund, is a simple checksum formula used to evaluate the variety of identification number, such as the credit card numbers, IMEI numbers, international mobile equipment identity number, national provider identification number, US, Canada, and so many other countries. So very popular algorithm worldwide, which is primarily used for this purpose only. Now let's see how does it work. A very simple example, Wikipedia is there. Assume an example of account number this, that will have a check digit added, making it in the form of the entire number followed by alphabet X, right? Now we want to check, we want to find a value for it. What do we do? How does the Luntz Mod10 algorithm work? Are we able to see this Wikipedia site? Is it visible?
Sir, it is visible.
Right. Thank you. So what we do here, we have written down the entire number 79927398871, and X has been left intentionally blank. Now what does the Luntz Mod10 algorithm says? First of all, double the every number, not every number, but every alternate number. So 7 come as it is, 9 into 2 18, 9 come as it is, 2 into 2 4, 7 come as it is, 3 into 2 6, 9 come as it is, 8 into 2 16, 7 is carried forward as it is, 1, double it, makes it 2. Now what do you need to do next? Sum the digits. So 7 is carried forward as it is. Now 8 plus 1 makes it 9. 9 is carried as it is. 4 is carried forward as it is. 7, 6, 9. Again there are double digits, 6, 1, 6. So we add the 2, we make it get 7, then 7, and then the 2. So these are the steps of the Luntz Mod10 algorithm. Now sum of all the digits in the third row, and the sum of the digits is 67. So 9 plus 7 makes it 16. 16 plus 9 makes it 25. 25 plus 4 29. 29 plus 7 36. 36 plus 6 42. 42 plus 9 51. 51 plus 7 58. 58 plus 7 65. And 65 plus 2 67, and that's how what we get is 67. Now what it says, check digit is obtained by computing the sum of the sum digits, then computing 9 times that value modulus 10. How does it do? Compute the sum of the digits, multiply by 9. So what we say, 9, 7, you multiply 67 by 9 and you get 603. So 9 into 7, 63, 3, 6 get carried forward. 9 into 6, 54, 54 plus 6 becomes 60. So we get 603. Now 603 mod 10 is then 3, which is the check digit. Thus x is equal to 3. So that's how the algorithm works. It's called Lewis Morton algorithm. These are the steps for the algorithm. So what we did in our program, we checked for the verification of the credit card number by applying the Lewis Morton algorithm, because globally it is accepted for the verification and the identification of these numbers. So same thing what we have done in our program. We check for the algorithm. It's a predefined algorithm. We had made a call to it and check for the validity of it. If it is true, that means the return value for the Boolean variable is true, is credit card valid is equal to true. Then we come to the else part and we tell to the user the received card number is valid. So he can be assured that whatever he provided was perfect, the correct number. Now we start working towards the block, right? That's what our objective is in understanding this algorithm. So what do we do here? We create 5 blocks. So we can see here we have made a call to substring function 5 times, and every block will be having 5 digits, because what is the total count? We have got 25 digits of the credit card. So what we do, we create 5 blocks, each having 5 digits. So that means symmetrical is there, uniformity is there. Now, so currently the entire credit card length is in the str4 variable, the string 4 variable. So we apply substring function over the str4 variable, and I fetch the first 5 digits. That means from the index number 0 to index number 4, and store it into a str5 variable. Then I fetch the next 5 digits of the credit card, starting from 5 to 9. How do I do it? I make a call to substring function over the str4 variable, and it returns me a value, and I store them into str6 variable. Then I fetch the next 5 digits from 10 to 14 and store it into a str7 variable. Then I fetch the next 5 digits from 15 to 19, store it into a str8 variable. Then I fetch the last 5 digits from 20 to 24 and store it into a str9 variable. So my 5 blocks are ready. I have not applied hashing as of now, but these 5 blocks are having the data. What data? Credit card data. Total digit was 25. I spliced it into 5 blocks, each having 5 digits of data, so that I can have a blockchain having 5 blocks, each block having a 5 digit of the credit card number. Then what I do, I make a display statement system.out.println chaining first block of the credit card. And what do? I make a call to the block class, means I'm instantiating, I'm using a new operator. New is for dynamic memory allocation. So I'm instantiating a block. That means I'm making a call to the constructor of the block class. And what I'm passing as a parameter, I'm passing the first str5 variable and the value null. Null, why? Because it is a Genesis block. And we know, we have discussed that the predecessor, there's no predecessor for Genesis block, so we don't generate any hashing. And what do? I keep on adding into a add block function. So add block function is a function written in the end. So I keep on making a call to add block, and what is the parameter I pass? The instance of a block class. And what is the content? The parameter I pass in the constructor, the str5 and the null value. That's how I change the first block of my credit card. Then same way I do it for the next, chaining second block of the credit card, then chaining third block of the credit card, chaining fourth block of the credit card, chaining fifth block of the credit card. So I make a call to the constructor of the block class 5 number of times. First time I pass str5, then I pass str6, then I pass str7, then str8, and then the str9. Because what I've got 5 blocks, right? Now what we'll do, we'll go on to the block class, right, from the number of blockchain.java. So let me come to this class block.java. This is a class available here. I hope you are able to see. So let's do it in the same IDE. Now what do I do here? I define a class called block. I declare certain variables like string variable, hash, previous hash, data, timestamp, and the number. Now from the previous program, we were making a call to the block class constructor, and we were passing two parameters. One is a data and one is a hash value. So for the very first, the hash value was null, but data has been received. Now I fetch the information from the data. What do? I use a this. This refer to the instance of the current class. That means the reference variable of the current class. So I said this dot data is equal to data that has been received. This dot previous hash is equal to previous hash. For the first block, it will be null. Now this dot timestamp is equal to new date dot get, means get the current timestamp, get the current nonce value when we are creating it. And these things are available for us. And now I want to generate the hash for the current block. So what do? I make a call to the calculate hash function, right? So our control transfers to a function called calculate hash. Now what I do inside this block, I come to the definition of it and I make a call to the MD5 function of the block class. This is the current class's block. There I can see a public class block and I make a call to the MD5 function. And what is the parameter I pass? I pass the information of previous hash, I pass the information of timestamp, and I pass the information about the data. This means that 5 digits of the credit card which is being called. And the control transfers to the MD5 function. So this is my MD5 function here. It receives the string as an input. So what is the content of this string? This is the content of this string. The previous hash value, the timestamp, and the data. Now what do I do in this class, in this function? I make a call to the get instance function of the message digest class. Now message digest class is a class which I have imported right at the top. Now Java provides something called Java cryptography architecture. We call it JCA. And message digest class is a part of the JCA APIs, application programming interface. So Java cryptography architecture I am using, and we have got a MD5 algorithm as a predefined API in the JCA. And we can look at the tooltip. The author is Manis, Renaud, and the Sterbens. And the information is available in the RFC 1321 that talks about the description of the message digest 5 algorithm. And MD5 algorithm is one of the most popular algorithms for the generation of the hash values. So what do? We call get the instance of the MD5 algorithm, and where it's available in the message digest class. If it is successful, it returns me the information about the MD5 algorithm, and I store it into the message digest class reference variable called MD. And I write such a code within the try catch, because I know in the runtime my code might get failed. The JCA APIs are not available, the MD5 API is not available, and I may not be able to get the instance of the MD5 algorithm. So my code can get failed. So it's always better to write such vulnerable code within the try part. Now if it has been done, most of the JCA APIs, Java cryptography architecture, application programming interface APIs, work on bytes and not on strings. And Java by default support everything as string type. So what do? Next challenge we have got, get the bytes from the string. That's the best option we have got. So what do? We may say get the bytes, and what should be the encoding scheme used? We have got an encoding scheme called UTF, Universal Character Set Transformation Format. Now we are using a UTF-8 encoding scheme because I want to get the byte from the string. We have also got UTF-16. We have also got UTF-32. But since here my objective is to get the byte from the string, so I use the encoding scheme called UTF-8. And I get the return information into a byte class variable. I stored into a byte class variable called BA. Now thereafter I make a call to the update function. Update function is a function available in the message digest class. So class name, reference variable dot update function, and I pass my array as a parameter to it. Now what do last? We make a call to the digest function over the MD. That means over this. And I expect it to generate the hash value for me, right? So what does it do? MD.digest, if it is successful, it will return me the information into a byte array called digest. So these are the hashed contents for the input data. What was the input here? This was the input. What was the input here? This was the input. So I fetched the byte from the input, stored into a byte array, passed it as a parameter to the update function of the message MD5 algorithm. And then finally, I made a call to digest function. Calling a digest function is same as generating a hash value. And we store into a byte array called as digest. And if everything is fine, I display statement result is success. And then again, I fetch the string from the bytes. So how do I do that? I make a call to toString function over the byte array digest, and it returns. So return to what place? Return to this function because it has been called from here. So string calculated hash contain this information, and I return calculated hash. Where do I return it? I return it to the this dot hash, but because I'm making a call to this dot hash is to calculate hash. So return value stored here. So now my final block data is ready. What it does contain? This dot data, this dot previous hash, this dot timestamp, and this dot hash, means the content of this, which has been obtained by making a call to the calculate hash function. And then I say system.out.println, the contents of the block are, and I display the value of the string class variable called block data. So I do it this exercise 5 number of times because I'm creating a blockchain with 5 blocks. So if you see the code number of blockchain.java, I'm making a call to it 5 number of times. New block str50, then str6 chaining second block of credit card, str7 chaining third block of credit card, str8 fourth block of the credit card, str9 is fifth block of the credit card. So for 5 blocks, I do the same thing. Then I calculate the time, how much time has spent in generation of this block value. So I say make a call to nanotime function and store into an end time variable, and then you subtract, because that's the only you will get what was the total time which has been consumed in the creation of the blockchain. And then I can display the same thing back to the user. Total time consumed in nanosecond during the execution of the blockchain is total time, and I display it. If any problem arises during the execution of my program, I've got catch block to handle it. So catch and the exception E, and will handle the matching exception. Now this was the add block function I was talking about. Here what I'm doing here, making a call to the new block, and then I keep on adding a block into the existing blockchain. So it's one block is there, you add another block, 2 block, then you add a third block, and then you fourth block, and so on so forth. And this was the coding of the Lewis-Morton algorithm, which we have just discussed on the Wikipedia portal, where I'm just performing a modulo 10 operation to check whether the credit card number is correct or not. So that is how the coding for the blockchain has been done. And what is the aim here? To secure the credit card number. Now when I run the program, I must pass the credit card number. So what do? I right click it, run as, and I go for run configuration. Right? And I go to the arguments, and I've entered the sample argument. Let me enter it again. First of all, I need to add the value for arg0. The arg0 is 16-bit credit card number. So let me enter 16 digit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Then I enter CVV number. Let it be 657. And I enter the validity, expiry date of the card. Let it be 042025. Means April 2025. And then I run a program. So I can see at the bottom the console window, my credit card block has been generated. So I say receive credit card number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Credit card which I have entered is 657. Receive expiry date of card is April 2025. Total concurrent card length becomes correct 25. Receive card number is valid. That means Lewis-Morton algorithm has done the job. Then chaining first block of the credit card. Now this is a hash value which has got generated, if you can see here, in the bytecode format. Then result has been success. Then again I generate the hash value. You can see it. A square bracket B @ then 164 A 0 1 2 3 combination of alphabets and digits. Then the third block of the credit card has been success. Then the fourth block, and then finally the fifth block of the credit card. So that's the way how I created a blockchain with 5 blocks, each block having the hash of the previous block, which we call the predecessor block. The first block is called a Genesis block. It will not have a hash to the predecessor block, and rest every block is having the contents like the data, the timestamp, the hash of the previous block, and the hash of the current block. And how did we do it? We use the MD5 algorithm, message digest 5 algorithm, for the generation of the hash values. And then finally we can see the time in nanosecond, how much total time is taken for the creation of the blockchain. Now here I have done it only for one credit card, but I can create an array, or I can create a vector. This is what is possible in Java, and I can have a bunch of the credit card numbers, and then I can fetch it one by one and give it to my program, and it will keep on generating the hash value. It will keep on generating a blockchain for all those credit card number. So here I've created 5 blocks for one credit card. Same way I can have another set of 5 blocks with second credit card, and so on and so forth. So it will keep on incrementing that way. So that is all from my side. If you got any doubt, please feel free to let me know. I will be happy to answer your question.
Thank you, sir. So there are questions in the questions box.
Yeah, sure.
So if you allow me, I will go for the questions now.
Please, please,
Okay.
please.
Okay. So Anurag Chatterjee, he asked like how blockchain differs from other traditional systems. I believe he wanted to ask like how does blockchain differ from other security algorithms.
Right.
So sir, would you like to, he's a student, so would you like to take the question? He is just in his second year, so would you like to take that question?
Sure. Look, if you look at the other secure algorithms, they work on traditional cryptographic techniques like Caesar cipher, Wiener cipher, Railfen cipher, affine cipher. Now, none of these cipher technique uses the hashing technique, but they have got their own mathematical equation. Like we say P plus K mod of 26, plain text plus the key value. We do the mod of 26 are the total number of alphabets in the English language. So they come up with their own mathematical techniques, but they don't use hashing. Even if you look at the algorithms, the symmetric and the asymmetric cryptographic algorithms like DES, AES, RSA, Diffie-Hellman, none of them uses the hashing technique. So the beauty of the blockchain is that it is purely based on the hashing. And in hashing, the strings are immutable in nature. You cannot modify or alter the contents once they have been created. And that brings a fundamental security to every block you add into a blockchain. And here you are doing a blocking twice. You are doing a hashing twice. One is having a hash of the previous block, and one is a hash of the current block. So the use of the hashing provides the inherent security to the blockchain.
Okay, sir. So a few questions are from students who are right now in their just into their second year. So I can understand there are a few basic questions like the one, sir. Like Prithijit Mitra asks, sir, can blockchain be modified once it gets stored?
No, it does. It can't be.
Yes. So
that is what we say
question.
The 3 fundamental principles of blockchain: decentralization, immutability, and transparency. That is what immutability says. You cannot modify it.
Modify it, right, sir. So, sir, what are the popular platforms where we can create blockchain applications?
I will always advise write your own code, something what I have done in Java programming language. Alternatively, nowadays very popular smart contracts are there. So you can use a Remix IDE, you can use a Ethereum platform for designing of the smart contracts in blockchain. Smart contracts are now getting very popular. We design a smart contract between when multiple parties are there. For example, I can go for the creation of smart contract between the patient and the hospital and the medical insurance company, so that when a patient gets hospitalized in a hospital and when payment has to be done, the patient does not have to make a payment from his own pocket. The medical insurance company can immediately swing into picture and they will make a payment on behalf of the patient to the hospital. So we can have a smart contract between these 3 entities: the patient, the hospital, and the insurance companies. So smart contracts are getting very popular and they're very played for. Hyperledger is there, Ethereum is there, Remix IDE is there, and they're all very popular platform for doing it.
Okay. So, sir, what kind of records can we keep inside a blockchain? So again, some basic questions coming, sir, and I am putting forward those questions because you can understand they are just students of second year. So
No
there
problem,
are basic questions. So, but still I put it forward, sir.
I
because
can
they're
take my
students.
blockchain to any application wherever security comes, I can use a blockchain. Any kind of data which I want to secure using a hashing technique, I can do it with the help of the blockchain. Now, what does the hashing says? Hashing says you can use the alphabets, numbers, wildcard characters, mathematical operation, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. You can do differentiation. You can do integration. You can do anything. It's your algorithm. It's your hashing technique. You can apply a set of operations, a set of mathematical or many mathematical operations together. It is your hashing technique. So you don't have to use the MD5 or SHA. You can come up with your own hashing algorithm, which could be a combination of alphabets, the numbers, the mathematical operations, in such a manner that the complexity increases very high. The hacker is not able to hack the data. He is not able to modify the data, corrupt the data, cannot able to violate the integrity of the data. In information security, we have got three broad words: confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data. So CIA is what is CIA is the name of the agency in US, but we also the CIA is a fundamental principle for information security also. So you can come up with your own hashing technique. You don't have to use a predefined hashing technique, and you can use any kind of data. Maybe I can use a hashing technique to secure banking data, financial sector data, insurance sector data, educational records in the institution, electronic medical record of the patients, the information about passengers in the railway reservation system or in the airways reservation system. So it could be any kind of the software system wherever security comes, I can take blockchain technology for the security of the data. It is as simple as that.
Okay, sir. Thank you for that answer. Thank you. Rishi Kumar Bhardwaj, Rishi, I really do not understand your question. Like you are saying issues concerned with privacy and security. I mean, I think you mean to say that what are the threats to blockchain, if any at all? Like on the privacy and security part of blockchain, what can be any sort of threat, if at all there is?
There are many threats. There are many threats. Even the traditional attacks which were already there in the information security, professional hackers keep on launching those attacks. Like you got brute force attack, dictionary attack, man in the middle attack, birthday attack, modification. We have got spoofing. We have got masquerading. We have got denial of service attack, distributed denial of service attack. So there are so many number of attacks which the blockchain is subjected to. But till now, it has been safe because of the core principle of the hashing. But yes, professional hackers keep on launching multiple type of the attacks on the blockchain.
Right, sir. Right. So, like Shubham again, he's again into his second year, asking, is it possible to remove any block from a blockchain network, sir?
Means the deletion of the block from a blockchain? No, we can't do it. Once the block has been added to a blockchain, it will remain there forever. You cannot modify, you cannot delete the contents. You cannot tamper it.
Okay. So that's the thing. Sahitya asks about encryption. Sahitya, encryption is a very standard thing. So I believe, still, sir, would you like to say anything about encryption? There are students
in very simple, in a very simple language, it's more like a scrambling of the characters, the shuffling of the characters, the jumbling, in order to make it insecure. For example, we say UEM is the name of the university, your university. Now, if I want to transfer this string UEM on the network, then anybody can hack it, change it to MEU, or change it to EMU. Now, what I can do, I can apply simple technique called Caesar cipher technique, which says every character should be replaced by 3 characters down the line. So you just do +3 to every character. So we say U, whatever character come after 3 characters after the U, you take that as a character, substitute U with that particular character. Then you take E. Then F, after E comes F, G, H. So I replace E with H. Then comes M, N, O, P. So I replace M with P. That means I'm doing something and I'm changing the position of the characters. I'm changing the occurrence of a characters. So we have got mono-alphabetic substitution cipher and poly-alphabetic substitution cipher. Mono means you're working one character at a time. Poly means you're working for many characters at a time. So I can, very simple technique, Caesar cipher, +3. Then we have got multiplicative cipher, we have got additive cipher, many kind of cipher techniques. They're all encryption technique. And so we got a plain text. So UEM is a plain text here. Then your output of that cryptographic technique is ciphertext. Cipher, CIPHER text. Then you transmit it over the web. It will reach to destination. The destination has, the source did +3. Destination will do -3. And then you will get back the original string as UEM. That's how the simple encryption and decryption works using a ciphertext. Now, if you're not using +3, if you're using any other number, which is not a Caesar cipher, now it's your duty and responsibility as a security expert that you use a Diffie-Hellman key exchange algorithm to transmit that key also over the web, so that at the destination, the person comes to know what is the number you have used, because you need to subtract it. So -7, -11, or maybe -7, very first character -7, then -9, then -11. So whatever technique you have developed, you need to inform the destination also, so that he can also do the job with perfection. I think that should be the simplest example to understand.
Yes, sir. It was a really simple example, and you made it very simple. So, sir, any restriction or any disadvantage of blockchain that I think
No,
2 or 3 of the
I
students
haven't come across. I haven't come across any disadvantage as of now.
Right, sir. So, which cryptographic algorithm? This question was posted way back, I believe, because sir talked about both the, like he talked
MD5
about
and SH. Message digest
MD5
5
and
is
SH he talked about.
They are
So
the popular
throughout-
algorithm for blockchain.
Okay. So, sir, I think Sahitya Roy again, he wants to ask that how, sir, generally you divide the blocks in a blockchain technology. How is there any method of, is there any like way
There
you
is no
use to
predefined
divide?
method. There is no predefined method. But my logic says keep the block size uniform. And if you can't do it, then in the last block do the padding. For example, for some reason or the other, you have got a data and the length comes to 27 digits. Now, the 27 is an odd number. It is going to create a problem, that's for sure. So what I can do here, I can create a block which is carrying 6 digits in it. So 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6, 4 blocks gets done. But that means 24 digits have been taken into consideration. Now I'm left with the 3 more digits. So what I will do the padding of 3 more digits, because that is what the networks teaches us. Whenever you're falling short of data, do the padding. And padding should always be done in the last block of the blockchain, so that's to make sure that all the blocks are symmetric and uniform in nature. That's my answer for it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So there are 1 or 2 questions, but I think students can do with a little bit of basic studies to get the questions, like significance of blind signature. Somebody was asking, sir. Shubham was asking.
Blockchain does not talk about the blind signatures as such. It does not. It is primarily meant for security of data.
Right. Okay, and core requirements of a business blockchain. That is again another question from Shubham. I think you have already covered that.
Yeah, so, I don't. Nothing more to add to that.
Nothing more to add to that. Yes. So yes, I think that's all. Just a minute. So one question. Okay, 10 to 15 years down the line, do we still expect this solid anti-hackable status from blockchain? Okay, so Professor Arun Kumar Chatterjee asks, like, do you expect blockchain to be this much of secure system after 10 to 15 years also?
See, what my experience is in IT industry and computer science, every technology has a shelf life of 5 to 7 years, nothing more than that. So right now, the prevalent technologies, we have got IoT, the cloud computing, the blockchain technology, they will survive for another 5 to 7 years, and thereafter it will be replaced by more superior technologies as such. Because beyond that, we don't have shelf life of any technology. They all come, they are exploited to the best of their advantage by professionals, by researchers, by academicians, by practitioners. And thereafter, another set of technology comes, it is superseded by another one as such. And that's how we keep on growing. So IT industry is very dynamic. All the students who are attending our talk, the biggest what we can share as academician researcher, you have to remain on your toes. This is a branch of computer science which will never ever get stagnated. You have to keep on upgrading yourself. You keep technologically, programmatically wise, otherwise you will become obsolete. You have to grow with the time, you have to move with the time. What is being seen today, what is being done today will not happen in 2026. For example, if I'm delivering a lecture to you in 2027 to your juniors, I will not discuss about the blockchain. Blockchain will become obsolete by then. I will discuss might be another technology altogether. So here is everything doesn't last beyond 5 to 7 years, because that's the fundamental, this very dynamic industry. So this is not an industry where you can learn the technology once and then can live the life comfortably forever. It's very difficult. You have to upgrade, keep on upgrading yourself. For example, nowadays we have seen the MERN stack has come, the mean stack has come, Node.js, AngularJS, which was not there 5 years back. Python was indeed there, but still these technologies were not there. So we are all learning it. We are all applying it to our solving our problem statement. So what will happen after 15 years? Difficult to say. Very difficult to say. We can't even say what will happen after 5 years.
Yes,
the technologies have limited shelf life.
You actually hit the nail on its head there. So,
that's my experience.
Yeah. Why is Markle tree, sir? One question from Prithijit Mitra. Why is the Markle tree regarded as the fundamental part of blockchain technology?
Now, I am not working on the Merkle tree as of now. So I will keep this question reserved for future. I'm not working on Merkle trees.
Different thing altogether.
Yeah,
okay, thank you, sir. There are some other questions, but I think those can be taken care of with little basic studies. Like Rishi was asking about decentralized entity. Why are these words important? Like, why is decentralization important? Why is dividing into blocks important?
When I'm dealing with cryptocurrencies, when I'm dealing with financial transaction on the web, in the traditional banking system, every country has got a bank which sets the rules and regulations, and they are very rigid. You have to follow them as it is. But the blockchain, rather cryptocurrency for that matter, gives you the freedom and liberty to not to get entangled in these traditional policies. You can set your own rules. There are something called miners. You can set your rules. You can inform the other miners. If your rule is acceptable by all, then everyone will start following what you have proposed. So it's very flexible system. It's not a rigid system like a traditional banking system. So rules are very flexible. The rules are the policies are not hardwired. They're not hard coded. Every developer in a blockchain world is called miner. He's a creator. He can mine somebody's web nodes. He can check the validity of the data, and he can even introduce certain new policies or framework or guidelines, which if it is acceptable to all the miners, it will become a part of the blockchain world. So it's very fluidity is there, which is not the part of the traditional banking system as such. But then fluidity, the flexibility brings a lot of responsibility also. Otherwise, the system might go havoc. The system might go at collapse. So we need to protect the system as such. So moment any even 0.001% transaction get modified, immediately the same information is informed to all the miners within the blockchain that this new transaction has come, this new information has been entered into a block in a blockchain. So information is shared among all the stakeholders, all the miners of the blockchain, and everyone keeps on getting updated with the things as such.
Okay, sir, thank you so much. There are several appreciations in the chat box, in the questions box, sir, but I'm definitely not reading this. Like Rishi is overwhelmed, saying, sir, for such a great session with you. Dr. Lata Rani is saying it was really an insightful presentation. So thank you so much, sir. There are lots of those, but I think right now we can end it. Shaumadip, if you can kindly take over again with the...
Yes, sir. So there is a lot of things we have learned from this session.
My pleasure.
Now I thank our today's guest, Dr. Rahul Johari sir, for the great lecture. It is really honor for us that you accept our invitation and come over here. Now I'd like to call our VC sir to give you the appreciation memento.
So thank you, sir. Thank you for your wonderful lecture. A very small memento from our side. I believe you can see the screen, and I'm sure that Professor Shobhik will arrange to send you this. Thank you so much. and I'm sure that the students have benefited a lot, because not many people actually take this initiative, or even what should I say, get the courage to demonstrate or during a lecture, which you so nicely did. And it actually shows
I always do that. I always do that.
you are such an expert at the coding aspect. It really shows that. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. My
Thank you.
pleasure.
So I think, Shomadip, we can end now if you have.
Yes, sir.
Thank
Yes,
you.
sir. Yes, sir. I
Thank
would
you
like
so
to
much.
thank the Department of CSE of UM Jaipur ACM Student Chapter for conducting this webinar. Specially thanks to our Honorable VC Sir, Dean Sir and Provost Sir. And special thanks to all faculty members like CSE Department of Professor Dr. Minal Kanti Sir, Professor Sobik Bal Sir, Professor Rupayan Sir, Sagarika Ma'am, Satabdi Ma'am, Ratul Sir and all the faculty members. And thanks to all attending. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Chatterjee sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.